All right. Hello and welcome back to the Futurism at JHU Podcast. I'm your host, Nicholas, joined with co-host Ricardo.
What's up, guys?
And today's kind of a bittersweet episode. It's my final, or we think it's my final in-person episode in the studio as I'm graduating. So in this episode, Ricardo and I just kind of wanted to reflect on where we've been and where we're going to go with the podcast. He'll be taking over for me in the spring as kind of like the leader of the podcast. So very excited to see how the podcast grows under his leadership. But yeah, I think it's been a really up and down, twist and turn journey. I mean, we started recording on our phones in Brody.
Okay,
which
theoretically,
is crazy.
we really started the ideation for this club initially, like freshman year, first semester, like right from the get-go. And that was like your idea too. That was like your initial idea before we even thought of this as like a club, right? It was just like an interest, and that's how it started. So I think it's even crazier. So the fact that we moved from like recording in Brody to the DMC and then to here, but even if you like push it back further than that, as just like, hey, we just kind of like talking about news and like other type of like cool tech stuff that's happening. So why don't we just like get together and talk about it, kind of thing. So if you push it even back, like that's crazier. And that was during COVID too, which is like, oh, that was rough.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just kind of a natural progression from like, oh, we're kind of like meeting as a club and like just discussing really cool stuff. And then we're like, wait, why don't we just like record what we're saying?
Yeah.
And make it into a podcast. So just like kind of like naturally evolved from like a genuine interest in talking about the future and like really cool like science and tech into like, why don't we like let the greater community listen to this, like the Hopkins community and beyond. So, and then I think it was just like, let's just start, right? Like grab our phone, get in a room in Brody and just record and like just start and like we'll like build up as we go.
Yeah,
Because
we'll like
I think,
figure it out.
yeah, exactly. Like we'll figure it out on the way because, you know, the hardest part is getting started. And like once you start, then like you said, we, you know, went from recording on our phones, you know, in the studio or in Brody to recording in the studio at the DMC where we had actual mics and then
But
now,
we're still on our phone.
and
the
still on
video,
our phones.
technically.
And then now we're in this, you know, awesome studio with the awesome CLDT team. And now we also have our own equipment, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, which allows us for a lot of flexibility. So definitely like going forward into the spring semester, expect a lot of more hot takes, you know, just fun little snippet videos on like just social media in general, but with like a lot of a higher quality than just like the quality you'd get out of a smartphone. So I can at the very least promise you guys that like there will be something happening with that equipment.
Yeah.
Eventually.
And I think just like kind of looking at all the episodes that we've published, I mean, we kind of started with more, you know, episodes of like just between us. We had some like speaker series when we were doing Zoom University where we had like Ben Badee talking about like science and tech. We had Will Choi, who was doing, was now at Brown Medical School. We had Dan Rabitsky, who was like the senior reporter at Futurism. He was really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
And then we had Dr. Kron, who's kind of like a futurist and educator. And then we kind of like shifted over to, I feel like we've done a lot of like alums at this point, right? Like we did, or like Hopkins affiliated people. So we did like Kristen with Kabil Day, which was pretty cool. We did Antonella Cerniolo, which was like more like medtech, but she's also Hopkins alum. Bill Kirst, who's been a great mentor for us, the host of the Coffee and Change podcast. And then, of course, our most now famous episode with Ronald Daniels, JHU President, which has been like the best like moment for me where it's like, wow, like this was like a really cool guest speaker to have, right? Like that's like the epitome of Hopkins, like to have
like the head of Hopkins.
So I think this gives like me the confidence that we can bring in, you know, high caliber speakers, not just at Hopkins, but beyond.
I was about to say, has Ronnie D been in any other like Hopkins affiliated podcasts?
Well, he was on kind of like an interview with SNF Agora, which is like the new building that they're building.
Yeah. But is that like a Hopkins
Wyman
club?
No, it's not a Hopkins club. It's
Has
just
he
like
not been on the Foreign Affairs either?
I don't think so.
Again, this is like maybe my lack of knowledge of clubs and like what Ronnie D's been up to, but like we could potentially, there's a potential that like this is like the first podcast he's been featured in
Yeah.
for, like a student organization.
Per-
Very first appearance.
Per my knowledge, I think so.
Right? So
yeah.
hey, we broke a milestone. We broke
I mean,
a record. We were the first one. Maybe. I'm not calling it, but
to be fair, like I've now like changed our description. So we used to have a description. Well, we have two descriptions. We have one, a student-led podcast discussing billion-dollar ideas in science and technology.
Yeah, that was the original, right?
But then I also have one that says the first and only science and technology podcast at Johns Hopkins University.
Oh yeah, we technically are the only
because as far as I know, I mean, podcasts didn't exist, way back when.
That's true.
And then as far as I know, there's no existing like truly like science and tech. I mean, there's the Foreign Affairs podcast, which is Foreign Affairs, very focused.
That's like political. That's
just political, which again, they have a great program.
Yeah.
And then there's the Hopkins podcast, or sorry, the What in the Health podcast, which is a public health podcast.
But again, that's health.
But again, those are very like honed in. I feel like ours is like way more like encompassing.
Yeah,
there you go.
Overarching, umbrella.
Exactly. So I do think that's a valid statement that we're the first and only science and technology podcast, which again, we're a science and technology school. So It just makes sense. I mean,
so if anything, even if this club eventually dies in like a year or two, which hopefully it won't, fingers crossed there. But even then, even if it does, we'd still be like the first one. So we've, in a way, kind of made history in terms of like the Hopkins community bubble, whatever you want to call it.
And the beauty is like the episodes will always be there.
That's true. They're not planning
anywhere.
on deleting the Google,
the
YouTube channel.
So I mean, everything's there. Like there's been some really cool conversations. The only person I didn't shout out to was Joe Variale.
Oh yeah.
That was a really good episode on the Hopkins Biotech podcast. That's like behind the episode with Ron Daniels. That's probably my favorite episode.
Really? Nice.
You know what? I changed my mind. That episode with my sister, I gotta put up there too. Christina special, because that was fun. Because she was visiting Hopkins, and she was like, "I want to be on the podcast," and I was like, "Okay." So we just like sat in my room and just like recorded.
Yeah, that was very spur of the moment.
Yeah, it was very spur of the moment. It was very spontaneous, but it was pretty deep. It was like a deep conversation about like human nature and evolution and like epigenetics and stuff like that. It was really cool. So I take it back. No one can top my sister. That's my number one. So I'm gonna say number one, Christina. Number two, Ron Daniels. Number three, Joe Variale.
Yeah.
What would you say are your top three so far?
My top three favorite like episodes out of the entire catalog that we have. Man, that's rough. We have had a lot of good ones. I feel like Dan Robitsky to me was like, I liked it. I don't know if I would necessarily put it at number one, but I really liked it because I've always been sort of fascinated with like how do people get these stories out. And so that was to me pretty interesting. My solo episode on like editing, I feel like I also enjoy doing that because editing is something that is very crucial to not only just like podcasts but YouTube channels in general, like anything, weddings. Like I don't know, maybe this is just in my circle of like Hispanic people, but a lot of the times, a lot of the like people that will film and do stuff for like weddings, like wedding photographers or videographers for weddings or stuff like that, at least in the community that I kind of lived in, people do the bare minimum when it comes to editing those types of videos where they'll literally just like not really do anything and just let the camera roll and that's what they spit out. But even within that section, like if you really go to like very professional wedding photographers and videographers or whatever, they'll edit it to make it look like a movie, which I think is really cool. So me being able to share that like passion for editing, some of the strategies that I use, some of the software that I use to hopefully like inspire people to just pick it up, even if you're just doing like a little school project and you're like, maybe like I could edit it to make it look a little bit better. That to me was really special. Probably the one on gaming because I love gaming.
That was a fun one.
So yeah, those would probably be like my top three contenders.
Nice.
So again, just purely based on topic, and if I was going to go ahead and like give someone as a featured speaker the prize, it would definitely be Dan Robitsky.
Yeah, that was a great episode.
So Yeah.
I really like that. I think it'd be interesting to have like Dan and Ben and like all the people we had like a couple years ago
Oh
come
yeah.
on again and see
Yeah.
like what's changed, because I'm
Like
sure
what's a new perspective that you
yeah,
have,
like they have a new
especially with
perspective.
AI, because
Yeah,
it's
with AI and everything, because so much has changed in the last 2 years that it's
yeah,
like I'm sure they have different thoughts that have kind of evolved as things have evolved.
definitely, especially like if you're talking about education, if you're talking about um for example, like Will Choi, when he was talking about like bioethics. Like bioethics is really important, right? But then now we've come across this new wave of AI. What are the ethics behind that? Even in correlation with like bioethics, like should AI be introduced into the biotechnology world? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Like how are these things changing things for us? So
Yeah, I feel like AI has always been a recurring theme. I mean, that was our number one most listened to Spotify episode, was our first episode on AI and neural networks.
yeah,
So like I feel like it's always been in the backdrop like of almost all of our episodes. And then we have also talked a lot about education. And I think that comes from we're students, right? So we're kind of in the
yeah.
educational
If we are
system.
able to like complain about any aspect of our education and hopefully like improve it upon by just talking about it, like we're gonna do it. Hopkins is like Hopkins is good. You have a lot of challenging things, but at the same time, like those challenges again like provide some problems and unique problems as well. So there was I think it was interesting very recently, and it was on Instagram. I think the Hopkins School of Public Health or maybe Arts and Sciences account, like one of the two accounts on Instagram, released a video. I think it was called like Blue Jay Banter or
I
something. I
saw
don't know,
that. Yeah, yeah.
where they were asking people like,
Yep.
how are you feeling about finals and stuff? And I was very surprised that like whoever was editing that video and the fact that it was outputted to an official like big Hopkins Instagram account, they didn't sugarcoat it. Everybody was like, oh, like exams suck, they're so hard, I want to die, like it's terrible. And I'm really glad that they didn't like paint this picture of like, oh my god, Hopkins is so great, and like I love my exams. I'm having so much fun in classes, because like that's not. It can be a reality, but I feel like for most people it's not. Like a lot of people go through classes, it's hard. They're sure enjoying it, but at the same time, it's rough. It's rough. So I'm in that way. I'm kind of glad that they kind of like didn't sugarcoat it and put it out there. I was like, yeah, people are struggling. It's final season. It's rough out here. But again, that's like a particular like problem that like maybe Hopkins has that other places don't. So even in that sense, like I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think like Hopkins students aren't afraid to not sugarcoat like the reality of Hopkins,
Yeah,
where it is a very intense institution,
like
right?
if you're
Like,
considering coming here, like sure come here, but like it's an elite university, so the level of strenuous things that you're gonna have to do can be pretty elite sometimes. So
yeah, and I think on top of that, like the caliber of students here is also great. Like I think that's something you have to remember is like Hopkins is going to be a struggle no matter what, right? Like it's
yeah,
very intense, it's very academic, it's very
that's true.
kind of introverted. I would say
Okay,
people.
we can make it the joke that like economic students or like what's the other one, like public health students have it easier in terms of like
Oh yeah,
workload,
like those are considered easier
but
majors.
a lot of them tend to pick up like second majors and stuff. So even if the original like trajectory is easy, like they'll still pile on more work to make it harder. So again, goes to show you just the caliber of students that
Yeah,
come here.
exactly. But I think like people think of Hopkins as this like competitive place. People always ask me that. They're like, "Oh, I'm interested in Hopkins, but I've heard it's like super cutthroat and competitive."
Oh, it's not.
I would
Yeah.
say like
I don't
it's
know where they
definitely
got the
not.
idea from.
Like people get that that like sense, but I think it's just a stereotype because
I think so.
okay, I think it is competitive if you make it that way, right? Like if you treat it as a competition,
But
it
with
can be.
I want but like with
But
who?
well, I'm done.
Who would you compete with?
If you see everything as a competition, I mean, some
Maybe.
classes are curved, right? So in a sense, you are competing.
I've never
But
been in a class that was curved.
my neuroscience classes, the vast
Really?
majority have been curved. Yeah, but I never
So
saw
like
that
only a
as
certain
a
number of people get
competition.
like A's, that type of curve?
Yeah, so it's like
That's
the
really
top
interesting.
10% get A plus, the next 10%, and actually they base it off of the top score. So like if the top score is
Oh,
a 95, then 95 is 100%.
interesting. Maybe okay. I think I've had one class that was kind of like that. I think it was my like my stats class, like statistics for life sciences, so Providence stats for life sciences, where the professor, but there was like an initial thing that he set up. He was like, there's gonna be like a certain amount of A's or whatever, like above this grade, because over the years, like he's noted that like usually the top whatever percent gets above a certain percentage. So maybe, you know, that could be like a 90%, right? So he basically said, hey, like if you get a 90%, like you get an A, but I'm not gonna count the amount of like people that get an A kind of thing. It's like based on previous years, I'm just like estimating that like, you know, whatever percentage of the class is gonna end up getting an A if I set the A to be like a 90% average. So anybody that makes like a 90% average or above gets an A. Like, but you know, he's not gonna count. So that's about the extent that I've had a class that had something to do with like with a curve. So that's pretty interesting. I've heard of classes curving up because, you know, we're all doing badly, but you know, that's about it. Like it's interesting. Maybe whiting is not that bad. Maybe computer science is not that bad. Maybe that's what it is.
It could be. And I would say, like, if there are any professors listening right now, I would say kudos, especially to the professors who don't have like who are nice, like who don't have quotas of like this many people get A's, this many people get B's.
Like that. I always found that so dumb.
Because I've had a mix of professors, and like, I mean, they've all been great. But there's been definitely like a spectrum of like, some professors are very nice, like, you know, if they know you, if they feel like you deserve it, like
they actually want to teach.
Like, you're gonna get a good grade. But then there's some professors who, no matter what you do, will kind of say like, okay, well, certain amount of getting A's, certain amount of getting B's, certain amount of getting C's, like, and they have this quota to fill.
Yeah, it's like a preset rule they kind of made up, which they just kind of go along with it because it's like, oh, I've been doing this for so many years, I'm not gonna change now. It's like,
yeah. So I don't really see the point in that personally. So I just want to shout out the teachers
like,
who are nice about it.
By the way, for those professors, like, you can still make the class hard, but like not just count the number of A's. You know, you can still make it hard. You can still make it challenging for the students so that you as a professor know that the students that are putting in that like 110% effort still get the grade that they deserve. But if like half of the class is putting in 110% of the effort, how are you going to penalize people? That is building in competition into your class where it can potentially become unhealthy. You know, we're already, you know, in lack of sleep, trying to get like grades up because a lot of people here are med students. They want to go to medical school, and so grades matter for them. Why would you put like more barriers to like make them more cutthroat than it needs to be? Like, realistically, if you are a good professor, like, you'd probably want your students to do well and not, you know, have a crisis over, oh my God, I'm like one person away from getting that A. Like, I personally don't feel like it should be like that.
Yeah,
but that's just me. I don't know. I'm not a professor.
But I do think, like, especially as a graduating senior, like, having at least gone through that, like, all the struggles of just being a Hopkins student, it definitely gives me confidence for like whatever I might face in the future, where I know I've been through a very rigorous institution. Like, I know I can survive like a lot of stuff thrown at me. So like, I feel like I've become more resilient, and I'm sure that's kind of a shared sentiment with a lot of Hopkins students, where you've been through a very intense environment and you know how to handle things after. And I think this is kind of one more complaint I have about Hopkins, which maybe is a good thing, is that
the rant on Hopkins.
Yeah, the rant on Hopkins. Sorry, so this has become also a rant on Hopkins episode, but
we're reflecting. So
we're reflecting. Sense. I would say my biggest qualm with Hopkins is there's no hand holding, right? Like in like the lack of like support for like anything really, if that makes sense. So like housing, they don't help with housing. Like, there's so many different things that I could talk about that they say there's stuff there, and there is stuff there, but like
it's not very helpful.
They're more like, here's a bunch of resources, like, good luck.
Yeah.
They're not like, we're gonna help you through this process.
They hand you a pamphlet and they're basically just like, here, there's some information that might help you. Good luck.
So I think, and again, this I think is an issue because I feel like there's so much administrative fluff at Hopkins. There's just like so much bureaucracy and red tape. It's like unbelievable. Like, even before I came to Hopkins, I was dealing with bureaucracy here because I took a class before matriculating prop stats. And I dealt with so much bureaucracy, like just even enrolling in that class. And I'm like, do you guys not want my money? Like, I'm paying for the class. So the amount of bureaucracy at Hopkins is insane. But I think that goes for any institution. But I think Hopkins in particular, the lack of like kind of like personalized support in general is kind of a double-edged thing, because on the one hand, yes, it makes it harder to like get through stuff at Hopkins, but at the same time, it also prepares you for the real world, because in the real world,
there's no
people are holding your hands.
Well, they can. There's some helpful people. It's not guaranteed. I think that's the qualm.
That's just been my experience. That's like my personal qualm is like, I kind of wish there had been more personalized support, but at the same time, I've also like learned to do things that I wouldn't have otherwise. Like I guess what you would call like adulting, like being an adult,
like survival skills,
doing things on your own, surviving in the real world. So it's kind of like this double-edged thing where it's like, on the one hand, I wish there'd been more, but on the other hand, it's like, okay, at least I've learned a lot, how to do things, how to adult.
Right.
So it's kind of an interesting, juxtaposition.
I guess you're kind of right in that sense. Like, you don't want so much hand holding that you're just kind of like stalling people's growth. I think that can be particularly bad. If somebody's just used to getting everything handed over, then it's really hard for them to grow from that, because once they lose it, like, their world is gone. Like, their reality is just shattered, which can happen, especially with like a lot of people that either are spoiled or have very overprotective parents. That's something that happens very often. Like the typical, I have very overprotective parents. Oh, I'm going off to college. Oh my God, my whole world is falling apart. I don't know what to do. Or, oh my God, I have so much freedom. I'm going to do so many bad things. And then you end up getting like hurt or injured or worse, right? Like, you've heard of stuff like that happening, right? Where people just don't know how to deal with themselves because they've never had to. But there's definitely still that people can definitely like fall through the cracks, which I think is also like a bad thing about not hand-holding anyone, because at some point you kind of like leave no room for there to be safety nets sometimes, which can be rough. So if, for example, I don't know, maybe in certain classes the professor doesn't really want to teach or isn't like a good lecturer, then you're having to rely on the TAs. And if the TAs aren't good lecturers either, because I will say a lot of TAs are handpicked by the professor as well, if they're not good lecturers either, or they're not able to communicate things effectively, which to a degree like TAs kind of are responsible for, or CAs are responsible for, then you're kind of doomed. Like, there have been so many times where I just had to like learn the content by myself and just kind of struggle with it, where I like, it didn't necessarily have to be that hard. It definitely did not have to be that hard, because like once you're getting into those safety nets of like, oh, I gotta go to office hours, I gotta talk to the TAs or whatever, and then they can't help you, it's like, oh man, oh, that sucks. You feel like you're the only one with the problem, and then you just kind of have to deal with it.
Yeah.
So,
and I think like in terms of surviving Hopkins in general, one thing that I've noticed, so I'm currently a study consultant, which means I work with underclassmen, basically like mentoring them, helping them with like time management, managing their classes, exam prep, stuff like that. And I did study consulting, I think freshman year, maybe a little bit of sophomore year. So I've been on both ends. A study consultee.
Yeah.
So like, I had a study consultant freshman and maybe a little bit of sophomore year. And so I've been on both ends of it, of being a study consultee and being a study consultant. And I think, again, it's kind of a double-edged sword where I found the program incredibly helpful. Like when I was a study consultee, I found it super helpful because it was like someone was there for me. I could be held accountable. So I felt like I was being supported in that sense.
Yeah.
But at the same time, now being on the other side of it, I kind of see it as, yes, definitely it's helping students, but at the same time, it's filling in a gap that should be filled by a university, right? Like the reason the study consulting program exists is because of lack of support from the university, where its students are filling in the gap of being kind of like the mentors and like, academic support and personal support for students, which again, kind of a double-edged sword, because it's like, would you rather a student helping you, or would you rather like, an administrator or something helping you, or an advisor helping you? So I think it's kind of like, again, I don't know if I like it more or dislike it more, but it's just how it is at Hopkins. And I think I'm at least glad that that's there, because that personally for me has been a really like positively impactful program.
Got it.
And I know there's like Pilot and there's Learning Den and there's other things too that are there. There's FYM.
You're plugging in FYM.
Yeah, you're plugging FYM. So I think that's all great. But yeah, so that's our reflection on Hopkins. I guess to finish our reflection, going back to the podcast, we kind of talked about like where we've been. So I know you're not taking it over. So I was curious, like, what are your kind of like thoughts on the future. Where do you want the podcast to go? Obviously, I'll try to be involved as well, but
Yeah.
you'll really be the point person. So what are your kind of you thinking right now?
I will now become the dictator of this
Yes,
podcast.
let's go.
No, but I definitely I want to do a lot more, especially because I feel like even though I've already done a lot for the podcast, like in me, there's so many like creative juices that just haven't come out. Like I want to do so much more. I want to be like so much more involved doing a lot of things. For example, like those drop-in videos where we do like hot takes and stuff. Like I want to be involved in that. Like I want to be able to just like go. One of the things that I've could be possible is just like we could just set up a random table somewhere in like Kaiser Quad and just like have a giant sign that just is like come speak about whatever, and then just have people drop in, you know?
Oh yeah, like where people have those tables where it's like, I'll debate about anything,
Yeah, but I don't want to debate people.
and then like come sit down, or like
Yeah.
you could be like, I'll talk about anything.
Yeah.
I like that.
So something like that, something fun, something to like put again the Futurism Club name out there, but also just like it's a fun concept, right? So I want to ramp up that. I want to find more people that are like willing to take up like crucial roles within the club as well, and I want to encourage people to just like go have fun and just like again one of the reasons why I love this club so much as well is just that it gets the creative juices flowing. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be doing a lot of things. CS, obviously, like there's some creativity in CS, but a lot of the times it's just like very monotone, just like doing your own thing, getting stuck in programs or finding a little bug there. But so I definitely want to ramp up production for the club, want to leave it in like greater hands, grow it a lot more, and be a lot more focused about the types of episodes and like how we're dealing with scheduling, stuff like that. So I know it's like a lot of administrative stuff, which is kind of boring for anyone like watching. Realistically, it's kind of boring. But yeah, that's sort of like the aim that I want to get to. Maybe being a little stricter about the club and like people actually doing stuff for the club. But aside from that, like I still want people to come out here, have fun, hopefully have more like student body people that just come here to talk. And I don't mean people that are like necessarily involved with the club, but hey, literally, and again, this is like an open invitation for anyone that's watching. If you ever want to talk about something, or maybe your lab is doing something cool that you think can revolutionize the world, or you just plain think that it's cool, or maybe you have an interest in cameras and you've seen innovation in cameras, or maybe whatever. Like if you ever want to come and just talk about it on the podcast, that's content for us. And I feel like it's really fun just getting to know people, where they're coming from, what they're doing, and what they're excited about. So I, again, as an open invitation, just like get more people from the general Hopkins population, because again, that was like one of the intents for the club, is just to have people, random people from Hopkins that just have cool things to say, to just come and say them in a spot where people can, be heard and have those thoughts be heard by the greater Hopkins population, or just like beyond that. So that's just my idea, my idealization for next semester. Hopefully we can do a lot of that next semester. Not holding myself up to like I have to do all that like 100%, but if I can do 70%, I'll be happy with that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that definitely like is aligned with like the kind of the founding principle of the podcast, which was to kind of disseminate information throughout the community and like really be an open community, not just like a club or a podcast, but like creating a community around this, of like having conversations that are very important. And I think everything you just said is great. So I'm very excited to see where the podcast goes under your leadership. I officially pass the baton over to you. Congratulations. But yeah, it's been a pleasure. We've both been there since the beginning.
Yeah.
Since the podcast was a little tiny egg of an idea, and now Basically. It's this. So yeah, I'm really excited to tune into the episodes and hopefully join a couple myself.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Yeah, hope you've enjoyed this past year or two of the Futurism podcast under me and Ricardo. It's been a journey. I'll miss being here, but it's been a great journey. So with that, a bittersweet sign off, and hope you enjoy listening to Ricardo and the rest of the team in the spring. So with that, goodbye.
All right. See you.
Bye.